Well, good afternoon. I want to particularly thank Mr. Tomar, Minister Rupala, and Minister Chowdhury, and all the members of the organizing committee for inviting me. One of the key themes I want to talk about is the challenge we all face in climate change. It's fair to say that climate change will challenge the world of agriculture at a time when we need to increase food production and increase equity in food availability. Climate change will make that far more difficult. Some people who think about climate change wouldn't realize that the work you do will be very critical to facing this challenge. Understanding how the changed weather is affecting our crops, their productivity, and how we can adapt to that really is going to require the best work in agricultural statistics ever, including the use of new digital tools. So everyone here is part of humanity's fight to adapt to the changing climate and make sure that particularly the poorest farmers in the world are not overly damaged by that. Climate change, of course, is very complicated. The models are imperfect in telling us exactly how the weather will change. So we're going to have to learn about different interventions, including the use of new seeds. We're going to have to accelerate development of new seeds and make them more available to the poorest farmers. Let me talk now about smallholders. All over the world, there are smallholders, but for today, or for this speech, let's imagine that we're going to treat all those smallholder farmers and their families as though it's a country, a single country that we'll call smallholder land. Well, what would this country look like? Well, first is we'd be very surprised, at least I am, by how many people would live in this country. It would be over 2 billion people of the 7 billion on the planet. And it's over a quarter of the world's population. So this is a huge group of people that we want to help. Unfortunately, we'd also notice that the citizens of smallholder land are very poor. In sub-Saharan Africa, over 60% of the smallholder farmers live on less than $1.90 every day. And also, if we look at the nutritional status of the citizens of smallholder land, we'll see that a very high percentage of the kids suffer from stunting. That is, they don't get enough food for either their physical body or their brains to fully develop. And these impairments, which start very early in life, last throughout their lifetime. And so it affects them dramatically as an individual and the community that they live in. And in many cases, this even predicts generationally that their children will also have more difficult health outcomes. So when we multiply these terrible effects of stunting throughout the globe, we see that it's an incredible tragedy, and it really holds countries back. It's only by solving malnutrition that you get the virtuous cycle that increased productivity allows farm output to go up, it allows labor to shift into other activities, it allows educational investments to have very high returns, and that's why we've seen countries progress from lower income to middle income and increasingly high incomes throughout the world. So smallholder land has the majority of all the stunted children. 90 million of the 149 million in the world are there in smallholder land. It's almost ironic that the children that have this food shortage are exactly the children of the people who spend all their time growing food. So it's an irony, but it's the truth. because the productivity of those smallholder farms is not very high, and the uncertainty, the risk, that is the number of years where the crop output is very diminished, is quite high, and also increasing with the effects of the weather of smallholder climate change affecting these smallholder farms. One drought or one flood is enough to wipe out any savings or any buffer stock that these families have. And so the intensity and frequency of both droughts and floods, which we know climate change will bring, will make things even more difficult. Unless we intervene, the effects of climate change would increase the number of malnourished children by over 25 million. It'll increase the number of childhood deaths by over 8 million. So we'll have worse effects in exactly the people who already suffer the most. You know, we saw in the past, in the 1980s, we had the floods in Africa affected 5 million people. In the 1990s, it was 14 million, and in the first decade of the millennium, this decade, it's been more than 23 million. So even though the most dramatic effects of climate change are out in the 2060, 2080, 2100 time frame, even in the data today, for those who are most vulnerable, we already see these effects. This is, of course, an issue even here in India, because a quarter of all these smallholders I've been talking about live here in India. And when I was in Bihar yesterday, I was impressed. The chief minister and his team is already talking about what they're seeing from climate change and how, in terms of water availability for their farmers, they're going to have to invest significantly to minimize these negative effects. Well, the good news is that there is a lot of innovation that can help us offset these challenges. You know, where do we look for these advances? You know, we look to the Seed Innovation Center. I was mentioned the Green Revolution and how foundations like Rockefeller and Ford were able to back incredible work of people like Norman Borlaug. Well, today, faced with climate change and the inequity of the difficulties for poor farmers, we need to double down. We need to more than double our investment in making these innovative seeds, and particularly the seeds that are publicly available. Now, agricultural researchers have new tools. These tools should allow us to create seeds that are more resistant to biotic and abiotic stresses, including heat, drought, humidity, and pests. A good example is the great work being done by the scientists at ICRSAT, a CGIAR center here in India. They've done some incredible work with new dryland cereals and legumes that are more tolerant of drought. And this is a case where these seeds are in the lab, but we have a lot of work to do to get them out into the farmers' hands, particularly the smallholder farmers. We also see that there's opportunities to engage the private sector. You know, agriculture is always a mix of government involvement and the private sector, and by getting those two to play their role in the best way possible, we can achieve higher productivity. One example is what we can do with livestock. Nations with lots of smallholder farmers tend to have herds and flocks that aren't as productive as they can be. India produces more milk than any nation because it has the largest number of buffalo and dairy cows. But on a per animal basis, each cow is 40% less productive than the global average. Let's call that the livestock gap. The good news here is that there are companies stepping up with new technologies that can close that gap. There's a lot of talk about the Internet of Things, but a startup here in India called Stella Apps, that our foundation has supported, are creating for cows what you might call the Internet of Cows. The company is based in Bangalore, and it works with smallholders here in India to outfit the cows with inexpensive wearable devices. The wearables track the movements, temperature, and other indicators, and then these are all uploaded in a way that it can be analyzed and determine things about the cattle health. The alert sent to the mobile phone can tell a farmer which cows are ready for breeding or which ones appear to be sick. The local vet can also access that data directly, and so herds are managed far more efficiently. In fact, for the smallholders who've taken advantage of this information, on average, they've seen a 20% increase in income. Well, so the digital revolution promises to change how we gather statistics, not just for the individual farm holder, but for the entire world. You know, the ability to look at policies, the ability to predict supply, we're going to be able to do a lot better than simply counting that output and pulling it together long after the harvest is done. In fact, in many cases, by using new techniques, we'll be able to predict productivity well in advance. And we should make sure that this rich information is not just available to the well-off farmers. We should make sure that we're helping with this data and processing it to help those smallholders that I was talking about. I believe that people here in this room have a big role to play here. We can become innovators in how this data is pulled together. We can become innovators in how it's made available to improve agricultural policies. I want to give one particular example that I'm excited about that's also an example from India, and that has to do with soil data. Of course, in order to have good crop productivity, you need to know a lot about the characteristics of your soil. You know, whole new areas, for example, in Brazil, were opened up by understanding what was going on with those soils and what sort of nutrients would make those soils productive. Now, this is different for different soils. So let's say if you lack zinc and potassium, then you need to get a blend that has exactly those nutrients. If farmers don't know which fertilizers to buy, they'll often buy too much nitrogen, so they'll spend a lot of money, sometimes causing environmental effects without getting the extra output that they're interested in. And so this idea of soil data really driving exactly how much fertilizer and what blend of fertilizer you use can be very impactful. In fact, it can start a virtuous cycle where a smallholder farmer, given access to credit, will use more fertilizer, have more productivity, and then in the next season be able to invest in their farm and once again use the right fertilizer to have more output. So really understanding what's going on with soil, it sounds easy, but it's actually very hard. Most places we don't have much information. In fact, here's what was a typical soil map of a few years ago. You can see this is Andhra Pradesh. You can see it's very, not much detail up there. Just showing you the percentage of zinc deficiency across the entire state. Second, the way that the measurement's done today, the soil assessment, it takes a lot of work, and it's actually a bit more expensive than it should be, and it's not that accurate. It's worth doing, but we should be able to supplement with new techniques. So for example, in India where they have soil health cards, today somebody has to travel to the farm, gather the soil sample, and then take it back to the lab. The labs are not cheap, and it takes time for those samples to be processed. In fact, there's way more samples collected that have been fully processed. So now that the opportunity is to add to that information a much more digital soil mapping. Instead of taking a soil sample from every field, we take representative samples from fewer fields, analyze these specimens using spectral methods, which are faster and more accurate, and then by taking the satellite data that looks at the soil imagery and using machine learning, we can take those sparse samples and be able to spread them out to predict at quite a granular level what's going on with the soil. And so, even for small farmers, we'll be able to get them rich information. Here's an example of a map, again, on Pradesh, that was created this way. And you can see that the resolution is dramatically different than what was had before. And this approach is happening right now in Bihar, Odisha, AP, thanks to a partnership led by the Indian government, along with the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. So this is just one of the new digital techniques, but this alone should allow much better targeting and much better use of fertilizer for exactly these farmers that we want to help improve. So this is one part, better seeds, better soil data, better information, better statistics that will allow us to minimize the damage of climate change. Climate change is going to require an incredible amount of organization, both to mitigate, that is, reduce the emissions, but even doing the best job we can, there's still, unfortunately, a lot of heating that will take place. And so the adaptation agenda, which draws in the world of agriculture, is going to be far more important than people have talked about. So, there's a lot of things about understanding what's going on with agriculture that will allow us to make these adaptation investments in a smart way. We'll have to do a better job of how we reach out to farmers. Again, there's some digital tools that should be able to help with that. And I hope at this conference there's even more ideas. Because for the sake of the world's farmers, and particularly their children, we really want to have the decades ahead be decades of productivity improvement. And yet, because of climate change, and in many places because of population growth, particularly in Africa, there really is a question: will we be able to drive that productivity growth, or will we let climate change in some significant areas actually allow us to go backwards? If we're able to get that growth, like was done in Asia during the Green Revolution, it can make a huge difference, because once you get that nutrition, then the human potential is much better. And so this is, it's really been exciting for me to learn about agriculture, learn about agricultural statistics, and realize exactly how important the work that you do is. I want to thank the Indian government, the FAO, and the organizing committee here for giving me this opportunity. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to work with you to take on this challenge and help all farmers, but particularly those smallholders. Thank you.
Download Tarang online radio app from Google Play Store.
You are listening to Tarang Devotional Online Radio.